There's a million different ways to hack your filtration. You're gonna find some that you love, some that you hate. This guy's crazy, but I've got 5 that I really do like. Reusable media, I think, is the first one we all kind of stumble upon, and if you haven't yet, let me tell you. Instead of having a cartridge or something that the company says you should replace every 6 months or throw away, chances are you could find something that would last a long time. Something like coarse sponge or bio rings, which even though some companies tell you to throw away after 6 months, there's actually no reason to do that, and they can be usable forever. Replacing anything that's meant to be thrown out or discarded with something that you can continually maybe give it a quick rinse or wring it out or boil it or whatever, maybe recharge it like Purigen, whatever it is you're gonna do to make sure that you can keep using it, save that beneficial bacteria, and not just be throwing dollars away. Instead, invest once and be able to use it to populate new aquariums, all kinds of stuff. So reusable, reusable, reusable. Let's save this planet as much as we can so we can keep more fish. Use an intake sponge. That is one of the best tips I have, whether you're using a canister, a hang-on back, really anything that would you can put one on. And so what is that, you might ask? That is a sponge that where the water gets sucked into the filter, it will first do its first line of filtration right there. Prevent fish food from getting sucked in, prevent shrimp and snails and gravel from getting sucked in, so that the media behind that can do its job as well. But it also, you might have a filter this big and you can put a sponge on it this big on the intake. In my opinion, doubles the efficiency of a filter just by keeping stuff from clogging it to begin with. It doesn't increase the surface area by double, but it seems that they can go at least twice as long. Now you want a coarse sponge, nothing too fine. Too fine will put backload on the motor, or it can actually just get so full it gets sucked up and shuts everything off. So that's not good either. But a nice coarse sponge really will extend the life of any media, whether it is one-time use or it is reusable. The next hack I have for filtration mostly applies to hang-on backs, and that would be hide an air stone in it. And what I mean by that is, so instead of having, maybe a sponge filter, maybe you go, I hate sponge filters, they take up too much space and I don't like the look. Air is still very important. You can take that little air stone and get it to stay in your hang-on back. But that's gonna supercharge all the bacteria and make sure the water that's going through there is really well oxygenated, and bring it back into your aquarium so that all your fish will really thrive. Same with the plants. Now we've got something for sponge filters, which you go, how can you hack a sponge filter? There's so few moving parts. Well, again, in my maintenance company, I would find myself in these situations of how am I gonna solve this problem? And after a couple of weeks, I would come up with it. And this one is using carbon with a sponge filter. So in the instance that I actually had, the people were getting their hardwood floors stained, and we were worried about all the toxic fumes, and the whole house had to be vacated for several days to do this. Now, I wanted something in the water that would absorb any chemicals that did get in there, even though we were gonna try to keep every one of them out that we could. And so what we did is we had the sponge filter. You take the carbon pads, we sell them, other people sell them, they're just in a sheet that you can cut, and you actually wrap that around that sponge filter and then put a rubber band around it. Now the water that gets sucked in through the carbon and goes through the sponge and then out the lift has now been treated. So that is one way that you can take medicines out, you can keep toxic chemicals potentially, you could just get tannins out of the water. Maybe you got a bunch of wood in there and it's browner than you'd like and you want to find a way but you don't want to put a whole nother filter on there. You can use the pads to do that. This hack comes in the form of use less filtration. If you're going online, you'll see a lot of people brag about how many canister filters they have or how many gallons per hour they're turning over or whatever. The reality is the less filtration you have, the more likely you are to service it and the more likely you are to know exactly how it works and to optimize it. And if you're doing all of these kind of little hacks and things, you're gonna have really efficient filtration versus someone who hasn't done any of these and just has multiple filters, right? With one filter, yes, if that filter fails, you're not gonna be, doing so hot, but you're more likely to make sure you clean the impeller. You're more likely to check the air pump that's driving that sponge filter. You're more likely to have replacement parts. You're more likely to have serviced it more often and noticed it before it got worse. It really just allows you to focus and really understand that filtration and do more with less. And people will poo-poo this. The internet's gonna say, I don't know what I'm talking about. Talk to some old people that have been around the hobby a long time, or people that have at least tried this. I know I learned it when I had big aquariums that would run a sump, it'd run a couple canisters and a hang-on back, and I just slowly started removing them. And as I removed them, I noticed that nothing was happening to the tank. It still tested out, I still did the same water changes, all of those things, until I got down to one filter. I believe that that one filter was even oversized. And so we're led by fear too often, and I think we could save a lot of heartache and wallets and that kind of stuff, because every filter you have, oh, that one overfilled or overflowed and now it's leaking on the carpet. Oh, that hose or that seal sprung a leak. And there's just a lot of, you know, horror stories out there. And I think if we stay in tune with what we've got going, it's a little easier to stay on top of. But if you liked all those, check out these tips here. Get 5 more tips to further you and your hobby.